Howdy folks, my apologies for the current cardboard nature of my studio. As it sits right now, I've been having some issues with my washer and dryer, so the bulk of my shooting space is taken up with repair work. As it sits right now, I would like to welcome you to the next edition of Storytime with Iron Wings. And today we will be discussing one of, if not my smallest, locking pocket knife that I own, the Buck 55, which you can see in front of you today. Just for reference, I put in my normal Buck 110 that I used to carry. So let's get that out of the way. So, this is actually perhaps one of the smallest, if not the smallest, locking pocket knife that I currently own. And it really is just a downscaled version of the Buck 110. I think it's about a half or a quarter scale of normal Buck 110. And there's an entire separate story behind that Buck 110 we'll get into in the next time with Story Time with Iron Wings. So, normally I do a little bit of reviewing, but the Buck 110 and the Buck 55 really are just about I wouldn't say the gold standard, but really just a standard for anyone who's into knives at all, and almost anyone who's into the knife collecting community has owned or used one of these at one point or another in their life. It's about as standard as you can get. The brass frame, the blade locking, it's a lockback, and unlike the Buck 110, this one's very svelte, it's very thin, and fits in your pocket quite nicely. It's clip point edge that's about 3.25 inches, 3.5 inches long, and I think it's about 7.5 inches overall when open. It's made out of 420 high carbon steel, or HC steel, Buck's trademark steel, and on this knife it's not super fast wearing, but it's also not really great at holding an edge. You'll be sharpening it frequently if you use it for heavy work. This one used to be my old whittling knife, so you can actually see quite a bit of polish on the edge where I've sharpened it over and over and over and re-honed the edge to something I thought was more appropriate for whittling. So, as usual with these Storytime with Iron Wing reviews, I kind of like to include a story with them as to why this is one of the untouchables, one of the knives that I'll never sell in my lifetime, that I'll never get rid of. And for this one, it's kind of an odd situation. Most people look at me queerly when I say this, but the story behind this knife is basically this. When I was in the Army, I used to own a Buck 110, I think it was a 50th anniversary edition with the S30V steel. A pretty special Buck 110 that had a lot stronger blade and had this nice little emblem engraved or stamped into the actual grip, made out of brass. It was a nice knife, came with a crappy nylon sheath from what I can remember, but I got it in the PX for, I want to say $30-40 on sale. So I picked it up because I'd always heard if you wanted a good quality pocket knife, you have to get Buck. Well, when I was in the Army, there's a long story. One thing led to another, and basically I was no longer in possession of this Buck 110 that I had. And I wanted another one very badly. It was one of my favorite pocket knives. In mind, this is when I was younger, and I thought weight was everything. I loved heavy items in my pocket. I loved the feel of the Buck 110, and I never used the sheath it came with. So, I asked my girlfriend for Christmas, my fiance at the time, to go ahead and get me a Buck 110. That's what I wanted more than anything in the world at that point. So, she goes online, finds one. She doesn't show me what it is. She buys it and gets it shipped to her house. And in the meanwhile, I decide, you know what, I have some extra cash at the time. I had gotten my VA approval through college for housing expenses, whatever, and I had about $50 to spend, and they had it on sale at our local Big Five. So I went and I bought a Buck 110 there. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a package in the mail with another Buck 110 from my grandfather. So I'm like, oh great, I'm going to have 3 of these damn things, which, point aside, that's not a bad thing because these Buck 110s are just great little gifts that you can give away to people who are getting into knives, but aren't super into it, and they can be intimidated fairly easily by something like a Microtech. So I have two of them, and I'm waiting till Christmas for my fiance at the time to give me this knife. And she hands it over to me, and I'm like, mind, the box is maybe a little bit bigger than the handle, maybe total that big. So she gives it to me wrapped in paper, and I'm like, what's this? I thought you ordered me a $1.10. I did open it. I open it up and I look at the end and it says $1.55. I'm like, you ordered the wrong one, hon. What do you mean? You said you wanted a $1.10. Yes, but did you read the label at the top? She opens up her phone, looks at her order history through Amazon. Oh. And we have a good laugh at that. So at the time, yeah, she ordered me this for Christmas one year, and she didn't read the description well enough, which I have plenty of experience with. I've ordered size 10 women's boots on mistake, thinking they were men's. So yeah, that's got a laugh out of me because I thought I was going to have three $1.10s the same year, and turns out I got two and a $1.55. And actually, this turned out to be one of my favorite pocket knives for a while. I took it up to Humboldt with me because legally on college campuses you can't have pocket knives larger than your palm size, some unofficial rule way of measuring. So I carried this when I was at Humboldt, and it was one of my favorite pocket knives. I used it for whittling. I used it to go cut branches off of little herbs I grew in my window, all this different stuff. Not herbs as in the Humboldt way, but like actual rosemary, thyme. I did a lot of my college dorm room cooking, so I had fresh herbs instead of the bottled crap. And yeah, this actually came in quite handy, and the reason I'll never get rid of it, that reason that I like this quite a lot, is because, not because it's from my ex-girlfriend or ex-fiance, but just because it was so funny that within a month, I went from having no $1.10s, and I absolutely loved the design, to having two of them, to thinking I'm going to have a third, and then it turns out I actually got something totally unique that I fell in love with because she at the time didn't think to read the description. She just saw the design, thought that's the one I wanted, and picked it up. So, with that being said, I kind of leaned away from being a strictly factual knife review on this series of story time. This is more, I've realized, a personal connection thing with me. So, do I have a bias towards this knife, saying it's great, saying it fits in your pocket well? Yes, but it's also somewhat factual because it's very slim, it's very light, and it's very durable, something that Buck takes great pride in. And before I had this one, I had a knife that broke in half from Buck. It was one of their fixed blade hunting knives, and I can't remember why it broke in half, but I actually sent it off to Buck, and they replaced it for free. So, would I recommend this knife just based on a purely emotional standpoint or purely personal experience standpoint? Sorry, heartburn. Um, Honestly, I would because it's not super expensive. The last time I looked, I think it was $35 or $40 on Amazon. And this is going to be a lot more durable than other pocket knives you're going to find. Granted, it doesn't have a pocket clip, but I'd recommend going and finding the case folding, or the Case and Sons leather sheath. It fits this pretty well, and it keeps it on your belt, which is what I used at Humboldt. And yeah, I'd say get this because a lot of gas station knives you see college students or lower income individuals carrying. This is a great alternative, and it's going to last you a hell of a lot longer. I've owned this knife almost a decade, and I've had no major issues with it. Never had a chip in the blade. The tip's perfectly fine. Honestly, I think this is one of the better pocket knives you can afford for its price point. And yeah, I just say go for it. It's really worth it. It's a fun little knife to own, and it does its job well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I appreciate you tuning in, and thank you very much. This is Iron Wings signing off.